Victim engagement is a critical component to the proper prosecution in any domestic violence case. If a victim feels that you personally care about them as an individual, they are much more likely to give you the information that you need to properly and thoroughly investigate your domestic violence scene. The challenge for law enforcement is to mentally reset as if you were perhaps responding to a call for service of domestic violence from one of your own family members. Certainly, you must remain professional at all times, but be engaged personally enough to do all you can do to ensure victim safety.
Many victims have been told by their abusers that no one will believe them, that the police won't do anything, and law enforcement officers have an opportunity to intervene and send a very different and very powerful message to victims.
They may be the first person outside the family who's been made aware that there is domestic abuse within the family unit. And so it is crucial for that initial impact for a victim to know that a representative of the government or someone outside of her family unit is caring and takes the situation seriously. I'm speaking of her because most victims of domestic violence, but not all, are female.
Taking the time and again, gaining that rapport with the victims, getting a trust with the victims where the victims feel comfortable in talking about their lives. They're not embarrassed anymore. They realize that this is an anomaly and that it shouldn't be something that's happening. It's not something that they have to accept, and they're willing to express that. And again, if officers go in a situation and they're kind of cold and they're indifferent because this is the third, fourth time, and some small towns that they may have grown up with these people and they may think they have an insight on what's happened. Again, you've got to kind of break away from that kind of thinking. We've got to look at. Research has shown that there'll be some homicides related to domestic violence each year, but in every case scenario, if you trace them back, there were times when we could have intervened and we could have done something. Seek a little further, dig a little deeper. That's what a good cop does, and I think that if we look at domestic violence as a crime and you treat it as such in terms of how you would investigate any other serious crime, you're going to end up putting together a real good case for prosecution.
It's vital that law enforcement officer establish rapport, and you can do that in a number of different ways. You can do it with your body language. You can do it with your listening skills. You can do it by providing information, all of the things that give the message to the victim that I'm here and I take this seriously and I care about what's happening to you.
It helps victims know that they didn't deserve this, that it's not their fault, that there are people that they can call who will care about them, believe them, and help them get the safety and justice that they need.
Statistically, one of the things we know about domestic violence situation is a woman doesn't usually stay away for good until she's left 7 to 10 times. And so you have to remember that this time might be the time she stays away for good, and you have to do everything right each time. And this time might be this time where you save her life.
I would just say every case is a little bit different than the next. You can read the person that's a victim, and just by the officer's instincts, they have those. And pay attention to them. The officers really need to pay attention to their instincts. If you see someone, you can usually see it in their eyes if they're really scared of someone, and if someone's going to be beat up or something's going on, you know when someone's scared.
If a victim is calling you repeatedly, that she sees your services and your agency as one of the safe places for her to get help when she needs it and to keep herself and her family safe. So it's really a credit to your organization if victims are feeling like they can call more than once. It often takes victims a number of times to get the resources, the courage, and trust that the systems are there to help them if they choose to leave a partner.
Because if you're going out multiple times, that's an indicator that just how powerless this victim feels. She's feeling more and more isolated, more and more powerless to change the situation, which would then require even more intervention by law enforcement, getting an advocate out, transporting her to a shelter, giving her the information she needs about the local food bank so she can feed her kids, about the order of protection process where child support, temporary division of the car, all of those things where she feels powerless. There are responses in the community, no matter how small in New Mexico, that will assist her in giving her back some of her power and keeping her safe for when the perpetrator understands that she's not coming back this time.
Other people might look at it as, why would you stay in that situation? Well, they know in no other situation. This has been their life for so many years, is that they're kind of desensitized to the whole thing.
Look at the behaviors of survivors through the lens of keeping themselves safe. That if they're not giving you all of the information, if they're not being cooperative, that odds are they're not doing that to be difficult or obstinate. They're doing that to keep themselves and their children safe. And that may make it easier to deal with the frustration.
A lot of times the victims have to go home and basically see the same person that you just arrested. And can you imagine being in their shoes? They don't want to get a divorce. They got kids. They got this, money problems, you name it. They got everything in the world hitting them at one time. Now they're looking at a divorce. So is it worth the beating? No, it's never worth the beating for them.
But if the victim doesn't have resources or information about how her rent's going to be paid, how her children are going to be fed, all of that, she's not going to cooperate. Because if she has to choose between living with someone who is abusing her and her children being able to eat, it's a no-brainer that she's going to stay in the situation which is more economically feasible for her and her children rather than be homeless and not be a victim of violence. And so that's why the information part of establishing rapport can be so important. If you do everything right, but then you leave without her having any idea about the order of protection process, what resources her local shelter can provide, information about access to local welfare services or other kind of things, whether it's shoes for her children, all of those kinds of things, alternate housing, whatever your county or city may provide. If you don't have a pamphlet or a number she can call for someone to get that information, she's not going to cooperate 3 or 6 months down the line because economically she's just not going to be able to.
And so it can seem very confusing to a victim why they're being asked all of these questions. It can feel like they're being grilled or interrogated when they're not the people who committed the crime. And so the more information that an officer can give and validating that, I know this is hard for you, I need this information so that that you can get the help that you need and we can make sure we get our reports accurate, whatever the reason behind that is, may help victims be able to provide the right information and do that in a way that feels less intimidating and scary.
You just have to start building your rapport and then start talking to them where they feel comfortable talking to you. A lot of women will not talk to a man and tell him everything. But if you can bring in a female officer or a victim's advocate, then they'll tell them everything they want to know. But you just have to build a rapport and confidence that you're there to help them and not leave them hanging out to dry.
You have to be able to provide a sense of security and a sense of trust in that victim that something will be done to change this terrible situation for them, or else they'll continue to live in that cycle of violence. It could be out of fear, it could be out of the fact that they have no other way out. And so the officers are only intervening, and they only have a short window of opportunity to address a very, very, probably an extended situation. Could be years that this woman or victim has been living in this situation.
There's going to be all sorts of fears going on through a victim, and so it's important to judge the evidence, judge the situation without making the victim feel that they're being judged because of lifestyle choices. We know that there are communities that just don't call law enforcement, whether it's homosexual relationships, if there's immigration status issues, all of those communities, you're going to be probably going into a home where the call has come from someone other than a person in the house, because they're afraid of law enforcement. They're afraid of being judged, of not being taken seriously, or having things happen to them that they think are worse than the violence that has gone on that night. Throughout New Mexico, we know that the second highest language spoken in New Mexico is Spanish. So it's crucial that you have a law enforcement officer, an advocate, someone available to do the interpreting for a victim. I would recommend against using the child to do it. You want to interview the child separately, not use an 8-year-old to try to interpret what his or her mother is saying, that you try to use a different interpreter. That can be crucial. If you are someone from a different culture or speaking a different language, you may come from a country where law enforcement officers are scary, that they're not there to assist you. So you may have just that cultural barrier.
Oftentimes the abusers do speak English and the other language. And in my experience, I've seen Spanish-speaking victims of domestic violence whose abusers are bilingual. They are oftentimes the person who communicates to the officer when they show up at the scene. And obviously they're going to give the officer their version, and it's, again, it's going to be used against the victim. 75% of the immigrant families, the children are U.S. citizens. So you get a very large number of families where abuser is either legal permanent resident or citizen. The victim is undocumented and the children are citizens. So what victims are hearing is, you have no rights, I will take the kids away, you will be deported, and I will, you're nothing in this country. Ensure to the victim that they have the right to be safe, regardless of their immigration status, and their options are available through social service organizations, and their immigration status is not the main concern at the moment.
Intervention is going to be a long-term process, and it's sometimes a true indicator of success is when that woman gets the courage to, and I'm referring as a woman, men can be victims too, but when the victim sees the situation, recognizes what it is, and gets the courage to actually leave the situation. And that's not going to happen just on the basis of the officer, making short contact for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, or whatever the case may be on a police call at 2 in the morning. This is going to take a whole village of people to work this out. Recontacting a victim at a time when the abuser isn't there, and when motions aren't so highly charged, and people are more at a reasonable state, may plant the seed in that victim that there are other ways.
At least stop by, call, see how they're doing, if everything's okay, if they need anything.
And I think this is the biggest complaint that I hear is once the officers leave, the victims don't hear anything more from the police. They don't hear anything from the prosecutors until 6 months later, when they may get a notice to appear in court. By that time, they're living with the person, and I think a lot of problems in prosecution is that victims recant because they see that the futility of what we're portraying to be, here's the answer, and it's not the answer. It really takes everybody involved.
While we can't guarantee that this will be the time that a victim leaves her abusive partner, we do know from victims and from law enforcement that if they are listened to, if they're believed, if they're offered resources, then they are more likely to cooperate with law enforcement, to call again if they need help, and to participate in the prosecution of crimes. And ultimately, they're more likely to be safer and have greater access to justice.
Victim engagement is a critical component to the proper prosecution in any domestic violence case. If a victim feels that you personally care about them as an individual, they are much more likely to give you the information that you need to properly and thoroughly investigate your domestic violence scene.